at an early age. But before we go any further, could people just put into the chat box what your position is? Like, why are you here this morning? That would really be helpful to me, and I think it'd probably be helpful to everybody else. So would everybody just take a second to tell just a little bit about yourself in that chat box? Thank you. That was helpful. Thank you very much. I think that was probably helpful for all of us. All right, so we've got a pretty wide array of people here representing many different positions, all connected to schools and gardens in some way, and all around the state of Maine, which is really neat. My story in terms of school gardens starts with I was working in RSU 3 as a middle school teacher. And at that point in time, this was like 2004, I think, there was a partnership between the Searsport School District, RSU 20, the Belfast School District, which at the time was RSU 34, and RSU 3, whereby at least once a year, maybe a couple of times a year, the three districts would come together. And again, this plays on this theme of collective energy is being really powerful. And we'd share the ideas from our different schools as to what was going on in our districts. And there was a presentation at one of the conferences I went to that was being sponsored by some of the middle school teachers at Troy Howard Middle School. And it was about how to incorporate school gardens into what you did with students. So I went to that presentation, and at that presentation, I met Steve Tangway, Don White, and Gary Bosk. And Steve was a social studies teacher at Troy Howard Middle School. Don White was a garden coordinator for the school, really the district, because he did have roles in other schools in the district. And Gary Bosk was the principal at Troy Howard Middle School. And that presentation, that had a huge impact on me. I realized that there was a huge power in school gardens to connect what was being grown outside with what you were doing with your curriculum, pretty integrally. Steve did a economics lesson in his social studies class, and students had a lot of leadership in what they were doing in the garden. And that really inspired me to think, well, okay, what we do every day could be connected to real life opportunities for kids, and the curriculum could be fully integrated. That the math curriculum could be integrated with that social studies curriculum if you're studying economics. And there are just so many, of course, science, there's so many science connections, and that connected learning is much stronger than if we look at each subject matter discretely. So how do we take all these different subjects and connect them together? And I think school gardens has tremendous potential to be that bridge to all different subject matters. So went to that presentation, was really inspired by what was going on at Troy Howard Middle School, and I left and thought, I want to work at this school. So I applied for an open math position the next year, and for the next 6 years, I worked as a math teacher at Troy Howard Middle School. During that time, Don White left, he retired, which was a sad moment, and we had to find somebody to take his place. And John Thurston joined as the new garden coordinator at Troy Howard Middle School. And I worked mostly with John while I was at Troy Howard Middle School. And he's another person that I'd like to thank for that relationship, because I learned a lot from John. John came from Madomic, where he'd worked as a horticulture teacher and biology teacher at the high school. So he had a lot of science background, which I lacked. And I had the math background. So together, we did a lot of work in the garden. And I would say that in terms of having a successful garden program, those partnerships are so important. And that opportunity for me to meet with John and talk about ideas that he had or ideas that I had, and just bounce those ideas off each other, was energizing. It gave us both a lot of energy and also led to some really great lessons. So I was there for 6 years. During that time, I was working on a graduate degree in educational leadership, but I liked working at Troy Howard Middle School so much that I kind of thought, well, I'll just stay here. But while I was working on that degree, my thesis was based on school gardens, and it looked at why aren't more teachers at the middle school utilizing school gardens. And the answer to that, as I did my research, was that most teachers are intimidated by the thought of trying to make that step, because it's a giant step of how do you take a garden that you might not be familiar with and a curriculum that really has no ties to gardens and connect them. So that's where having a garden coordinator makes a big difference, because especially somebody who has some background in science and education. So I think that that's the key to making a successful program, is having somebody who's dedicated to that garden, who can be out in that garden, who understands the garden, but who also ideally understands academics and can see ways to connect them, to work as a partner with the teachers, who can work on professional development. So anyway, as I said, I was happy at Troy Howard Middle School, but the principal position at Walker School in RSU 3 opened up. And I didn't apply for it because I was pretty happy at Troy Howard Middle School. They went through the application process and they decided that they would reopen the position. And at that time, Carol McGovern was the principal that was leaving Walker School to go to Mount View Elementary School. And she was my mentor teacher when I first started teaching back in 1993. And she approached me and she said, you know, Glenn, I know you've got your certification. Why don't you apply for this position? Because we haven't been able to find the right person yet. And I think you'd fit well. And my son was in kindergarten at Walker School at the time. So I thought, well, maybe this is the right move to make. And I did apply for that position in RSU 3 and made this shift to a leadership position as principal of Walker School. And when I came to Walker School, a lot of the people who were on the hiring committee, they asked a lot of questions about my experience with school gardens. At Walker School at the time, there was a greenhouse that is probably about 10 years old when I took on the position as principal. And it really hadn't been, it had kind of languished in the past few years and was mostly being used for storage. And a lot of the questions during the interview would, how would you connect learning to outdoor activities? And I love those questions because I think about that a lot. So I knew that when I went into that position that the school board and that the parents at Walker School really hoping to revive a garden program that had started out but hadn't really gained any momentum. So went into that position. I worked at Walker School for a year and thought, well, how do we make this happen? And there was no support beyond the teachers at the school, who of course were really busy teaching their own programs. And they did things out in the greenhouse, but they really wanted to do more. So how to make it accessible to those teachers? I went to I can't remember what it was, may have been a Maine School Garden Days conference. I can't remember which conference it was, but Ellie Libby was there. And Ellie Libby was coordinating FoodCorps for the whole state of Maine at the time. I think this was the second year of her partnership with FoodCorps. So she had Ryan's position back in 2011 as a coordinator for the state of Maine. And I said to her, I said, what we really need at Walker School is a John Thurston. She said, well, I think we have something that will work. And that is, we have a partnership with FoodCorps. And she started to tell me about FoodCorps. That was the first time I'd heard about FoodCorps. The FoodCorps partnership was really early on in the state of Maine at that point in time. And she said, I think we can get you a FoodCorps service member. And that was the beginning of a relationship that now I think I'm in my ninth year of a partnership with FoodCorps. I can't say enough about FoodCorps as a partner to make things happen in schools in Maine. Is a real force to get school gardens started, to work on farm to school networking, and really build a sustainable model that once FoodCorps leaves, can continue on without the support of FoodCorps, and then FoodCorps can move on to other schools. So FoodCorps is, to me, is right now the most essential force in the state of Maine that's spreading the good work to other schools. So thank you to Ryan, to Malia Demers, big thank you to her on a number of different levels, because she was also the service member at Captain Albert Stevens School for a couple of years. So she's really been a wonderful person to work with and continues to be a wonderful person to work with. So FoodCorps, we had a service member join us. I can't remember the year, but back probably about 2012. And at that point in time, my position extended to Troy School. So I became the principal at Troy School. Over the course of the next 5 years, with the assistance of 3 different FoodCorps service members, we slowly moved out to each school, each small elementary school in the district. In RSU 3, there are 4 small elementary schools. And by the end of that 5 years, each of those small elementary schools, Brooks or Morse Elementary School in Brooks, Monroe Elementary School in Monroe, Walker School in Liberty, and Troy School in Troy all had school gardens. They all had either a greenhouse or a hoop house, and they all had some sort of garden programming happening at their school. And in this process, as we were working toward getting school gardens in each school in the district, we were also thinking about how do we sustain this model? And that's the question I think we're all wondering about, is how do we make school gardens sustainable? So that was a question that we, with the FoodCorps service members and garden leadership teams, we revisited that question often. And in terms of school garden leadership teams, the students were an integral part of those leadership teams. And this is at the elementary level. So these are kids in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade who either met with me or with the FoodCorps service member or with both of us to talk about what would be the plan to move school garden programming forward in our district. We also had community meetings where community members, we often had food that was planned and prepared by students with the help of the FoodCorps service member. And we brought families in and we had discussion groups and we talked about what do we need to grow this program. And those were always great conversations. Students always presented, students made the food. And as I said, they planned the food, of course, with the help of FoodCorps service members. And Michelle Earhart, she's another person I want to recognize for all of her help in making this happen. She was always at those meals helping coordinate everything. So those community meals, we talked to parents about like, okay, how do we keep this going? And a big part of this is convincing the school board that it's making a big difference in the life of kids, that kids love this, that it's a way to engage these students so that they're excited about coming to school, they're excited about learning. And we also invited school board members to these community dinners, and at each one we'd have 2 to 3 school board members that would come to the dinner, and that was important as well. The other key piece to building a sustainable program in RSU 3 was presenting to the school board. So I would do presentations to the school board, but I would always work to get a couple of students in there and the FoodCorps service member in there to do the presentation and really highlight the words of the students, the experience of the students coming from them first person. I think that's so important to building a sustainable program, and I think that was the key to our success in RSU 3. And finally getting the school board to say, yes, let's put in a position to support this program. Because we had a 5-year plan. I mean, initially, it was funny when I started out with FoodCorps that I think most schools, the idea, they were pushing a 3-year program with FoodCorps, and the idea that after 3 years, you'd have a sustainable program. And I don't think that that's happened anywhere yet. Is that correct, Ryan? I don't think there's been any school that's been able to do it in 3 years.
That's correct. Yep.
Yeah.
That's why we don't have that number anymore.
Yeah, right. I think 5 years is kind of the minimum number to build the support district-wide. So we went to the school board. I put it in my budget. I put in the budget the amount of money to pay for an EdTech 3 to coordinate the gardens in 4 different elementary schools in RSU 3. Superintendent at the time did not support the programming, and he recommended to the board an amount of 0 to fund the position. And this was a school board meeting that I'll never forget. I was sitting there as a administrator. I'm not allowed to speak at school board meetings unless I'm called upon. I remember the discussion of the school board members. They weren't totally informed as to what an EdTech 3 can do. John Thurston was an EdTech 3 in his position at Troy Howard Middle School, did an outstanding job, and was, he was happy to do what he was doing as an EdTech 3. But the school board felt like an EdTech 3 couldn't coordinate 4 different schools. So ultimately they voted down the position, voted not to fund it. And I was, as you can imagine, greatly disheartened. But immediately one of the people who voted against it said, I propose that we create a teaching position. And then he went on to explain that he felt that an EdTech 3 position wasn't enough to maintain the program, and that he felt strongly enough about the program that he did want to support it, but not with an EdTech 3, but with a teacher. And after that, there was more discussion amongst the board, and they decided that they would vote to fund a teaching position to cover the RSU 3 garden program. And again, they voted, and I think the final vote, I think it was 6-3 in favor of creating a teaching position in RSU 3 to keep the program going. And that's where Darcy comes in. We were really, really fortunate in RSU 3 to hire Darcy Johnston as our garden coordinator, and she's still there. She does it as a teacher. I'm not going to get too much into what Darcy does because she's going to do the next presentation, but she was the power that kept things going and is keeping things going in RSU 3. So right about that time, opportunity came up to be principal at Captain Albert Stevens School in RSU 71. I applied for that position, and that's where I am now. And Ryan, how am I doing on time? Am I supposed to be done at 8:35?
Yes, sir. Yeah, you got about 2 or 3 minutes left. Okay.
Well, basically, I'm not going to be talking as much about RSU 71, but I've been here for 5 years now, and we've had a partnership with FoodCorps. This is the 4th year now in RSU 71. We have 2 FoodCorps service members this year, Danny Vos, who I see is on this call, and Sarah Hallam. And they are both working to spread it throughout the district. We are in 3 different schools in RSU 71 right now. Danny's taking care of the programming primarily at Captain Albert Stevens School, and Sarah is out in Nickerson School and East Belfast School. And the plan, we following a similar plan here, building the support of the school board. We've already done presentations to the school board from the very beginning. We wanted the school board to know what garden programming looked like in our district. So the key is building those partnerships. And I want to make sure I've thanked everybody that I want to thank, because I do want to recognize all the people who've really helped out. I haven't mentioned Vinya Lindley yet, but Vinya Lindley is a awesome force in farm to school programming. She's helped out in both districts and continues to help out, especially on our zero waste lunches most recently. And I think that, yeah, I think I've acknowledged everybody I want. It's, like I said, it's a real collective effort to make this work. And I just like to recognize all the people who have made it work to create thriving, at this point in time, most of Waldo County, most elementary schools in Waldo County. Northport is another school in our county that has made this happen without FoodCorps assistance by working with Tanglewood. Well, I guess it has happened because Tanglewood had a FoodCorps service member, and Tanglewood partnered with the school in Northport to make that happen. So FoodCorps, thank you. Big thanks to FoodCorps. And thank you everyone for your time this morning.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Glenn, for sharing that story. It's something that inspires me, and I can say inspires FoodCorps nationally. I'll talk a little bit more about what FoodCorps is and what our organization is like when I speak at the end, but we are a national organization, and pretty much everyone in the country knows about Glenn and RSU 3 because it's a huge success story, and it's something that we look to model in other places. So it's definitely a story that I love hearing. I could hear it every day. If you want to come back tomorrow, Glenn, and tell me that story again, it won't bother me. But I'm going to shift now and turn it over to Darcy, who, as Glenn mentioned, was the person who came in and took over the work that FoodCorps was doing in RSU3 with Glenn and his staff, and then just took that and exploded with it. So Darcy, go ahead. And I actually don't have your PowerPoint, but your internet seems to be better than mine this morning. So
okay, hopefully all will go well. Well, good morning to everybody. I'm Darcy Johnston, and I am the elementary teacher of agricultural projects for the 5 elementary schools in RSU 3. And Glenn and I never actually worked together because I came in just after Glenn got that teacher position, integrated into our system. And I got the job a couple of days before the start of the school year. So I just dove, right in. And I was coming from a background in special education. I had been a special education teacher for 16 years, but I'd always kind of been the person to either start up the school garden, get the kids working out into the school garden. So I'd always had a real love of school gardening and integrating the school garden into what I did with students with special needs, and just found how amazing giving students that real life hands-on experience could be in helping them understand, concepts that I was supposed to be teaching them and in school. And so when I saw the job posted for RSU 3, I just couldn't believe it. And I said, I'm just going to apply for it, and ended up getting the position, which was wonderful. But I think that background in special education and working with a variety of students of different ages in a variety of content areas really helped prepare me for my position now. So I'll share a presentation that I have with you to give you a little overview of what we have in each of our 5 school gardens. and then talk a little bit about some ways that I have tried to connect with the school board and administrators and the larger community to garner support for our program. So we'll try to screen share here. And we'll get started. So when I came into the position, and I'm hoping everybody can see the screen there, the program was called the Waldo County Growing Project. And this is actually a picture that was just taken a few days ago at Troy Central Elementary School of our little flower bed out in front of the school, which we just kind of decorated up for fall. But the kids love being out in the garden for sure. So like I said, I'll give you a little overview of our 5 school gardens and describe ways that we connect with those around to spread the word about our garden program and field any questions afterwards. And this photo here is actually taken at Walker School this fall, out in some of our raised beds. And yeah, students, we were planting kale, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when I talk about Walker. So like Glenn mentioned, my position is a full-time teaching position, and I am a certified general elementary school teacher, along with being a certified special education teacher. I work 1 day a week in each of the district's 5 elementary schools. So when I came on board, there were gardens in the 4 outlying schools. And then when I came on board, we also started a school garden at Mount View Elementary. And I try to really integrate a lot of the academic standards from science, ELA, math, social studies into our gardening curriculum. And this year in particular, all itinerants, so music, phys ed, art, gardening, are focusing on integrating literacy with just being real intentional about integrating that as one of our district's goals. We also are working to grow food for our schools. So everything we grow in the school garden is eaten by our school community. Although we have donated a little bit to some of Waldo County Bounty's efforts this year as well. And just fostering an appreciation of our environment, being able to do things for yourself and knowing where food comes from. So I'll take you on a little tour of my week. And I start my week at Mount View Elementary School on Mondays. And we have 4 raised beds. We have some small tilled plots out back. We have an apple orchard that we share with the middle and high school. And the high school also has a greenhouse they use for seedlings, but we partner with them and are able to use it in the fall to grow greens for our cafeteria. This year in our raised beds, we had some themed gardens, and I will show you a little video of those themed gardens. But some of the fun things that I mentioned that we do are growing those greens in the fall, pretty much through December. And this year we've already done some tomato seed saving with some of the heirloom tomatoes that we grow in our garden. So I'll share this little video so you can have a look at what's growing in Mount View. And please excuse the video. I do 1 take and no editing, so I just roll with it.
Well, hello everyone. I'm here at Mount View Elementary School in the newest of our school gardens in our elementary schools in the district. And here at Mount View Elementary, we have 4 raised beds, and we also have some garden beds out behind our school. But this year, I'll show you what we have growing in our raised beds. And we took a theme garden approach this year. And thanks to a couple of our teachers and her students, they decided which kinds of themes gardens we wanted this year. So let me give you a little tour of what we have in our raised beds. So over here in this raised bed, this is our salsa garden, and we have a variety of tomatoes. We had some peppers intermixed in our tomatoes, as well as some onions. And we've got some freshly planted cilantro that is just starting to come up as well.
Kinds of different tomatoes in there, different varieties.
Sorry, guys.
You may see some that look a lot like peaches. This
I'm gonna
one here,
stop
for
the
example,
video real
beautiful.
Peach tomato and some cilantro seedlings coming up along.
Sorry about that, guys. Let me go back to screen sharing my presentation. I was hoping to get the screen a little bigger for you, but I don't think I managed that very well.
I have some
So anyhow, at Mount View, we do have a bunch of theme gardens this year, including a pizza garden, Halloween garden, and salsa garden.
Garden beds out behind our school, but
Here we go. On Tuesdays, I'm at Walker School, which is where I am now. And at Walker, we have a fairly large greenhouse. We have several raised beds and a fruit tree orchard, thanks to Retree Us. And some of the fun things that we're doing this fall is we are participating in the Back to School Garden Program, which is a grant, and Retree Us is helping us out with that. And I believe Maine School Garden Network, and I believe it was USDA funded, but we were given a lot of cooler weather seedlings, kale, greens, things like that to plant this fall, along with row cover and things like that for growing during the school months. And so we've got, you know, kale and things like that planted in our school garden here at Walker and a couple of the other schools. We also grow for the Sam Birch bean collection. And this is something that's been really rewarding for me, and our students love it. And Sam Birch was a teacher, I believe, at Coney High School, and he grew out, he had a collection of about 400 different types of beans. And he would show many of those varieties at the Common Ground Country Fair every year and grow out about 100 varieties every year to keep the collection viable. And he died. And so his collection has been kind of passed on to a woman who just happens to be a family friend of ours. And she now, since she can't possibly grow out 100 varieties every year, asks for help from schools and other individuals to grow out certain varieties. And so we've been doing that the last few years. And you can see on this screen are the Chester flag beans that we grew at Walker School. And this year we're growing 3 other varieties at some of the other schools as well. But it's amazing to see the different varieties of beans. Once we harvest the beans, we give back a cup of those beans to the collection, and then we get to keep the additional beans for eating or for future seed. And Walker happens to be our largest of the production gardens here at school, along with Troy Central Elementary. And I'll show you a little video of the kids shelling beans at Walker.
so here we are at Walker Greenhouse with our kindergarten class, and we are shelling some dry beans for a bean project that we take part in. And these particular beans are a native bean that has been grown in Maine for hundreds of years, and it is by the Wabanakis, and it's called a, it is black and white. and they are called Chester flag pole beans. And I'll give you a glimpse of the rest of our greenhouse. So it's a little bit of a jungle in here, but we've got tomatoes and kale. Our beans were growing there, and more pole beans over there. So thanks so much.
All right, let me see if I can advance to the next screen here. So on Wednesdays, I'm at Morse Memorial School, which is in Brooks. We have a high tunnel at Morse, and which actually needs to be reskinned. We've got the materials, but just need to make that happen. We've got also several raised beds and mature fruit trees, including apples, pears, and kiwis, which are more on a bush. We also have a hummingbird garden. We've made catnip toys out of catnip we've grown in that hummingbird garden. And this year we are planning our first applesauce day with some of the apples that you see were picked by those students on the screen. And we also, in our raised beds, had several beds of potatoes, which I'll show you some kids digging those up. And once those were dug up, we planted some of those kale and lettuce greens that Retrius gave us through the garden grant.
We are at Morse Memorial School digging potatoes with one of our first grade classrooms. So we have some raised beds up here, and then we have a little shed, and behind those apple trees there, we do have a little high tunnel there. So this is our garden.
On Thursdays, I'm at Monroe Elementary, and we also were granted an orchard at Monroe Elementary a few years back from Retria. So again, another shout out to them for the amazing work that they do in helping school gardens. We also have 5 raised beds and have been adding to the flower gardens out in front. And there's also a greenhouse that we're working on getting operational through a grant through the Maine Community Foundation. Last week on Thursday, we had applesauce day, and we've done that a couple of years now. And in the top picture, you can see a couple of our students processing the cooked apples through the food processor, and a student below that enjoying it. And they absolutely loved it. And we're getting excited about participating and partnering with Tanglewood with our 4th and 5th grade classroom to learn about hydroponics. So that will be coming starting at the end of this month and into November and December. And I end my week at Troy Elementary School, which is also one of our 2 largest of our school gardens. We, since I have taken over the teaching position, we've put in a high tunnel, which has really helped boost our production. We have a large tilled plot, a few raised beds, and plum and apple trees. And we have some of the special projects we've done there are tapping maple trees to have a maple syrup day. And we also grow beans for the Sam Birch bean collection. And I noticed there were a couple of food service people in our meeting today, and you'll see trays of roasted vegetables that actually are going to be included in the entire district's hot lunch next week in an Italian sausage cacciatore dish. We've had a bumper crop of eggplant, peppers, tomatoes this year at Troy Elementary. And there were so many that it was too much for our school alone to handle. So our amazing cook volunteered and said she would just roast up the vegetables. She has distributed them throughout the district. So they will be included in our lunch next week. And that's the same with all of our food. Our cooks have been amazing at each of the schools at taking whatever we're growing and integrating that into the snacks and school lunch program. And I'll show you a short video of Rowan harvesting some of the Sam Birch beans at Troy School.
Here we are at Troy School, and we have Rowan here who's going to talk to us about some of the Sam Birch bean collection that we're growing for. Go ahead, Rowan.
Well, about these beans, you know when they're ripe to pick is when they are about this color. And when they're not ripe, they'll be a purplish color. And how you will pick a bean is you will hold the stalk and gently just pull it off.
Great. Do you want to show us what the seeds look like on the inside?
So inside, let's just open it. Oh, this one does. Ah, there we go. The seeds are purplish.
Awesome.
Little white spots on them.
They are beautiful. Thanks so much.
All right, so that's my tour around the gardens for the week. And now I'll just talk a little bit about how we try to foster relationships and build support for our garden program with school board administration and the larger community. So it's with our school board and administration, I have done a few presentations to our school board. The last was before Corona. So I'm looking forward this fall to setting up a time that I can present to them, especially once our harvest is done. So I can give them some hard and fast numbers on how many pounds of produce we grew in the school gardens, and to show them how our harvest season went this year, as well as some of the academic activities I've been incorporating into the school garden. Typically in the last few years, we've grown over 1,000 pounds of food amongst the 5 school gardens. And so that's pretty impressive. My first year here, it was about 250 pounds of food. Second year, it went up to 500. And from there on out, it's averaged a little over 1,000 pounds of food. And so I'm looking forward to presenting to the school board some of those figures a little later this fall. Also, most of the schools either have a weekly or a monthly newsletter that goes out. And so I do weekly newsletter submissions for Troy and Walker School, because that's when those newsletters come out. I always try to include pictures. The kids and families really love that. A couple of the other schools have monthly newsletters, so keeping the community and administration aware of what's going on and what we're doing. I also send direct emails to the superintendent, assistant superintendent, and principals regarding some of the successes we've had in the garden. For example, that bumper crop of eggplant and peppers and tomatoes. I let them know that all that food is going to be served in each of our schools this coming week. And I think we recently received news that our school district got a grant from the Bessie Thornock's Farm Trust of $20,000. And Shirley Bessie was a member of the community who used to live right next door to Mount View School, and was a supporter of agriculture. And I think knowing that our school district has such a strong gardening program is one of the reasons, and having support of the administration and school board is one of the reasons that we were granted that money. And we're hopefully going to be building a year-round greenhouse, heated greenhouse at Mount View for the district to use at the elementary, middle, and high school levels. And finally, to build support with the community and keep those connections going, I try to use some social media, although it's not my real forte. We have a Facebook page that I try to update with pictures and news at least every couple of weeks, if not every week, now that the school year has started. And please feel free to go to Waldo County Growing Project and like us. Like I said, the monthly and weekly newsletters go out to families. I always am at open house, other family events at school, and I'll be, parent conferences are coming up soon. virtually, and so I'll be participating in those. Partnerships with local organizations have been incredible. So Maine School Garden Network, Midcoast Conservancy, Retrias, Johnny Selected Seeds, Tanglewood, Maine School Garden Days, all those kinds of Maine Ag in the Classroom, all those partnerships and resources have been just instrumental in making connections. Attendance at agricultural conferences and events. The background here is from a Maine Ag in the Classroom event this summer, where we learned all about wild blueberries. That painted frog rock in the background is from the Blueberry Barrens in near Columbia Falls. We always show produce at the Common Ground Country Fair and Windsor Fair when it's in session. This year we were not able to do that, but next year we'll be back on. And also I'm a member on the Waldo County Extension Association, so having those connections has been helpful. And we've also been able to donate some of our bumper produce to some of the drop sites for the Waldo County Bounty program. So trying to keep our feelers out there and keep connected with community has been really important and enriching. So I'm not sure if anybody has any questions that they'd like to ask or.
I'm feeling inspired. Thank you so much for that. I just am looking at the chat box, trying to monitor that. So I think that we have a question and answer at the very end, and I don't want to bleed into Ryan's time too much, but
Perfect.
yeah, I'm not seeing questions, but please, participants, feel free to write in your questions, and at the question and answer portion, we will get to those. But just now, seeing lots of connections with FoodCorps, and Ryan will get into that soon. Ooh, yeah, we'll get to that, Martha. I see your question about the recipe. Cool. Yay. Oh my gosh. I love all those videos. They're so sweet. Okay, Ryan.
Yeah, I agree. I knew I should have gone before Darcy because I don't have a presentation and I don't have videos of children learning. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, that was a very cyclical process, because I believe, Glenn, that was your son doing the bean presentation at the very end. So
No, that was Casey Holmes' son, who's
Casey
who's a
Holmes.
Boy-
Oh, right, Rowan, right.
Yep, Boy Scout with my son, but yeah.
Oh my gosh, I completely. Last time I saw Rowan, he was not that big, so that's why I didn't recognize him. Yeah, great. So appreciate Glenn and Darcy sharing your experience, and I just want to share my experience from a bunch of different perspectives. So I'll just give you a little bit of background about me and how I come into this work with FoodCorps. So I am a farmer first and foremost. I was a commercial farmer for about, I don't know, 12, 15 years. After college, I went to college to get a degree in music performance. I went to the University of Maine, and through the course of that 4 years, I realized I don't actually want to live in New York City, which is what you're going to do if you want to become a successful freelance musician, because that's about 85% of the music industry happens in this country. When I was in high school, I couldn't wait to get out of Maine. And then through the course of my study at UMaine, I discovered I actually love it here. Got exposed to a bunch of stuff that I had never experienced as a young child. So my parents were not very outdoorsy folk. And then when I got to college, I started to learn how amazing this state is from a natural resources perspective and also from a community perspective, and realized I didn't want to live anywhere else. So I started my own farm, and I did that for about 12 years. It was a diversified organic vegetable farm in central Maine. And during that time, that was actually right after I had graduated college. I started gardening just as a hobby. and then went on and did some other professional gigs while I was learning more and more about that. But in the course of those years, I had kids and saw firsthand the exactly what happens when kids are exposed outside to fresh food that they have had a hand in growing. They are curious about it. They will eat it. They will try vegetables. And that's what we ate, in my family. We ate what I grew. And so, we have relatives who have a different lifestyle, and they would always say around holidays, how do you get your kids to eat broccoli and beet greens? And I said, that's what we eat. So the same way you get your kids to eat chicken wings and cookies, that's what you eat. And so, you're the grown up and you're in charge of the grocery bill. So anyway, that I got to see firsthand. My daughter from a very young age, when she could walk, would be out in the garden with me. And when she started to be able to talk, she would say, Dad, can I pick a beet green and try it? And I would say, you can eat all the beet greens you want, honey. And so I got to see firsthand just what that experience does to children's palate and to their curiosity. And I started to think, why doesn't every kid have access to this? Why didn't I have access to this when I was a kid growing up? We didn't do anything like this in school. And I didn't get it at home because, like I said, my parents were, not outdoorsy, worked full time all the time, and had those responsibilities. In addition to being a farmer, I've always been kind of a policy nerd, just on the side at first. After I graduated from college, I worked for a member of Congress for Maine's congressional delegation and started to get interested in politics and political science and policy in general. And as a farmer, I worked for him for a couple of years, and then I decided, I really want to do this farming thing full time and quit that nice, cushy government job with benefits and decided to be a full-time farmer. And so I did that for about 12 years. But in the process of doing that, I got to know a lot of farmers around Maine and got particularly involved in the food sovereignty movement that sort of had its birthplace on the Blue Hill Peninsula, and worked with a bunch of farmers out there to pass the first few food sovereignty ordinances that started in Maine. And through that process, got really interested in policy and how it worked at all different levels. Like I said, I worked for a member of Congress after I decided to stop being a commercial farmer. And now I'm a homesteader and do things on a sort of family scale instead of a large commercial scale. I needed a job. And so I went to work for an organization called the Natural Resources Council of Maine, which is an environmental advocacy organization. Ended up working with them. I was one of a three-person team that helped establish Cottonwoods and Waters National Monument. And then after that was successfully established, they basically allowed me to write my own project. And at the time, my kids were starting to get into school, and I was starting to go to school board meetings because of that interest. And I wanted to get back into doing things that were at that intersection of education, agriculture, and policy. And so I started to work on helping schools reduce food waste because that was I was working for an environmental advocacy organization, and food waste is a huge environmental catastrophe, let alone the ethical implications that come along with it. So I started researching that, and I started going out into a lot of schools and talking to a lot of cafeteria managers and dining services directors and principals and teachers all over the state of Maine and around the country. And it was a really fascinating education for me to see sort of how schools actually operate and some of the many challenges that teachers and principals and cafeteria staff and custodians and superintendents and everyone along the chain faces. So a lot of folks are really interested in this type of hands-on, experiential, project-based learning, but there are so many hurdles in the way, or some of them perceived and some of them real, that it prevents a lot of experimentation. And so I was starting to look into that, how we could overcome that. And similar to Glen's experience, I sort of stumbled on this idea of FoodCorps. There was a position that had opened up, and I looked into it and I thought, wow, this is exactly what I want to be doing, is helping schools overcome those hurdles and try to build some of these programs. And I was fortunate enough to get the position that I have now with FoodCorps. And so I just want to talk a little bit about what FoodCorps is. So it's a national nonprofit. We serve in 14 states around the country. And what we do is basically we are an AmeriCorps grantee. So AmeriCorps is the national service community. It's an agency within the federal government. And we basically place service members for a year of service directly in elementary schools throughout the country in the 14 states where we operate. Maine is one of the original 5 states where FoodCorps operated. This is our 12th year in Maine, our 12th year in existence as an organization. And basically our mission is to connect kids to healthy food. That's a very broad statement. The way we do that is through hands-on learning, school-wide culture of health, and healthy school meals. So we try to have our service members focus in those 3 areas. Hands-on learning is fairly self-explanatory. This being Maine, our growing season is very short. So service members are doing a lot with students outside in the fall and spring and summer if the school that they're in has summer programming. A lot of gardening work, a lot of harvest. The kids do the harvesting, the weeding, the planting, everything that has to do with that. Like Darcy was showing, kids picking beans and shucking them and, preserving the seeds and whatnot. So the kids are doing all that. And then in the winter, traditionally, we have sort of moved inside and done cooking lessons with students. Now, because of COVID, a lot of schools have used some of the COVID relief funding that flowed down into the school districts to build outdoor infrastructure that allows for gardening in the winter. So hoop houses, greenhouses, things like that. So we're shifting a little bit more, but we still do a lot of cooking with students. And then the healthy school meals aspect of what we do is service members are serving in cafeterias. So they're eating with students, they're modeling good eating habits, they're serving on the line, sometimes serving students if a cafeteria is short. They're helping spruce up the cafeteria, make it a more welcoming environment where kids can enjoy the process of eating, the process of seeing the food. So we do a lot of service in cafeterias, do a lot of taste tests, work with cafeteria staff as sort of the go-between between the cafeteria and the garden. So if the cafeteria staff would like to, try a new recipe and the school garden is producing a piece of that recipe, maybe the service member is leading a taste test so that the cafeteria, before they invest a lot of energy and time and money and training their staff to produce something that they don't know if the kids are going to eat, the service member can help determine that with a process of gaining feedback from the students with a little taste test. So we do a lot of stuff like that. And then the last area of service that we have is school-wide culture of health. And that's what I want to focus on mostly today. Because our service members traditionally over the last 10 to 11 years have focused really heavily on the first 2, the hands-on learning out in the garden, the cooking lessons, and then the service in the cafeteria. And when I kind of came in, that they had been focusing less on this idea of school-wide culture of health, at least insofar as I interpret what that means. And when I came in, I kind of wanted to change that because in my view, that's the most important area of service. And the way that I view school-wide culture of health is basically taking the long view, because FoodCorps is not a permanent fixture or solution in a school. As an AmeriCorps grantee, we follow the AmeriCorps, we're supposed to follow the AmeriCorps model, which is basically service members come into a community where the organization that they serve with is invited. They will serve for a couple of years, build up an infrastructure, build up a culture, and then we'll go somewhere else. Because I think there was a question earlier in the chat about what is the criteria for FoodCorps service. And one of those criteria is that you're a Title I school, which means at least 50% or more free and reduced lunch rates. In Maine, that doesn't limit us very much, unfortunately. I think there might be 15 districts maybe that at a district level are not in that boat. So there's, I think, 180 school districts. I can't remember the numbers, but we're not limited. There, we could serve in a lot of places, but we only have 10 service members. So we have to be really strategic about where we place those service members to reach our goals as an organization, as a state, and the goals of the communities where our service members are serving. And so my idea is, because we're not going to be there forever, it costs FoodCorps, we raise millions of dollars a year for the entire country, and it costs us about $50,000 roughly per service member. We invest in that community $50,000 through service members serving in a community. And so, as Glenn mentioned, this is not a single or a double year commitment. We typically, when we partner with a community, it's for the long haul. I typically tell our communities 4 to 6 years is roughly what we anticipate investing into the community. And so, that's about $250,000. And so I take that responsibility very seriously. I want to make sure that if we're going to invest that much time, money, and essentially the life of service members for a full year, they dedicate a whole year of their lives to serve in a community. I want to make sure that everything that gets built in partnership with the teachers and the administrators in a school and the community doesn't just fall off a cliff when we no longer have service members serving in that district or that school. We want to make sure that the programming continues and that it continues to grow, even when we have taken our service members and gone to another community to do the same thing. Because investing $250,000 and people's entire lives for several years to build something that then doesn't survive is the worst thing that could happen in my view, because it doesn't meet the goals of the community. It doesn't meet the goals of the service members who dedicate their lives for a year or two. And it doesn't meet the goals that I have for the state, which is that eventually I want every kid to have access to the types of things that Glenn and Darcy were describing. I know that there are other folks like Martha Poliquin and Justin Derrier on today, and we were just at Falmouth schools where they are working. We took the service members from the cohort this year down there. They have an amazing program, and every time I go to a program like what Darcy has, or what Glenn has, or what Justin and Martha have, I think, why doesn't every kid have access to this? Why every kid in Maine outside picking things, harvesting things, and then eating the things that they have produced? Why isn't every kid seeing things on trays that were purchased from farms that are in that school district? And so that's my eventually goal, my personal goal for what FoodCorps can accomplish and help the others in the Maine Farm to School Network and Maine School Garden Network accomplish, is that every kid in Maine has this. And so when we build these programs and then they don't continue, that's another hurdle to accomplishing that, because word gets out. So thanks, Sam. I'm so excited and I'm rambling, sorry. So I just want to talk quickly about how do we build that program so that it does continue after FoodCorps leaves, or maybe you don't have a FoodCorps service member. How do you build a program so that it continues? And basically, what I tell our communities when we start a partnership is we have what we call graduation pathways for FoodCorps. We have 3 graduation pathways. One is, so basically what happens after FoodCorps leaves. One is create a position and fill it. So similar to what Glenn and Darcy have described today and what happened in RSU 3. Another one is to shift the partnership from FoodCorps to a smaller, more localized, specialized nonprofit or community-based organization to continue to support the school. And the third is to sort of have the existing staff and bring into their workload the work in the garden, into the cafeteria. I have very strong opinions about which of those is best. Anyone who knows me knows I have very strong opinions about everything, but this one in particular, I'm a huge fan of the creative position and fill it, because I think if we had, in Maine at least, if we had small nonprofits in every community that could do this, they'd already be doing it. We don't have a lot of those unless you're in a Portland or a Lewiston type of place where there are, those types of nonprofits. And if we could get your existing teaching staff to take on that work plan, they'd already be doing it. But we already ask too much of teachers and cafeteria staff and administrators as it is. There's not enough hours in the day. And also I've seen the benefits of having a person in those positions, whether it's at Falmouth or in RSU 3 or at Troy Howard, if it's at Madomic, those places where they have a garden coordinator or wellness coordinator or whatever you call it, those are the programs that seem to thrive the best. And so, but no matter what your goal is, whether you're with FoodCorps and you're looking at a graduation pathway or you're not, you have a goal, maybe you want to get more local produce on the cafeteria tray. Maybe you want to every year have a series of field trips where kids go out to local farms. Maybe you're trying to build a greenhouse. No matter what your goal is, eventually it's going to come back to money, unfortunately. But that's the reality of the situation as I see it, is somebody's going to have to write a check. And what that means in a school district is the school board. And what that ultimately translates to in Maine, because of the way education is funded, is the local taxpayers. So you need to build support amongst all those constituencies so that by the time you go to a school board and eventually to the public, there is no question that they're going to support it. And that's a big ask. So how do you do that? Well, first, I think it's important to understand how school budgets are built, especially if you're going to be looking to the school budget itself to fund your projects, whether it's a position, building a greenhouse, the field trips, whatever it is. If you want that money to come out of a school budget, which I recommend, because that is the most sustainable way to do something at the school level, you need to understand how a budget is built. And you can learn that by going to your school board meetings and just sitting around and paying attention. But really quickly, essentially every year around January or February, the school district has to build a budget for the next year. And so what they'll do is ask the superintendent to build the budget. The superintendent will go to the principals from every building, and that trickles down to the teachers. The teachers sort of put together a wish list. This is a very broad, it doesn't happen exactly like this, a very broad outline, but the teachers will put together their wish list, send that up to the principal. The principal will review it, go back and say, you need to cut this, or yeah, I think we can submit this. The principals will submit to the superintendent. The same process happens. There's some negotiation. The superintendent, the business manager then present that their budget ask for the entire district to the budget committee of your school board. The budget committee then takes several months hearing presentations from different constituencies, and they eventually will agree on a budget and present that to the full board. Full board does the same thing. They negotiate, they debate. They then eventually come up with a full number, and that goes to the voters in your community. And then the voters have to, so the board has to approve it, and then the voters have to approve it. And so you have to get all those people along that chain to support you. And as Glenn mentioned, there he is, the man himself, John Thurston. As Glenn mentioned, there are times where somebody in that chain is not supportive. So like in RSU3 at the time, it happened to be the superintendent, but there are other people who were. And so they were successful in going around that hurdle. And so there are ways to do that, but essentially some of the biggest things I can tell you as a school board member myself, I'm on the school board in RSU 19. One of the best things that you can do is go to your school board on a regular basis and make presentations. Specifically, if you can get kids involved in those presentations and their parents, that's a huge win for you in terms of what your goals are. So think about what your end goals are from the beginning and think long-term. How am I going to get the school board to support this? Because I will tell you from my experience on the school board for several years now, if I go into a meeting at the beginning of the meeting, I walk into the library where we have our meetings and I see anybody in the audience, I know we've done something wrong, because nobody goes to school board meetings ever, except the school board themselves and the administrators. So if somebody's there, I know we're in trouble. Because usually when people show up, it's because something has happened that they are upset with. So that is sort of what usually happens. Nobody's there, and when they are there, they're upset. But school garden presentations are the opposite of that. So when I go into a school board meeting and I see parents and kids in the school board meeting, and kids stand up and talk about the amazing experience that they're having in the school garden and the types of things that they're eating in the school cafeteria because of their school garden experience. And I see parents then stand up and say, little Johnny came home and asked us to buy broccoli at the grocery store because of a broccoli salad recipe that he had tried because of the school garden. And little Susie has been having a lot of trouble with school, but when she goes to school garden days, that's her favorite day of school, and she's able to learn. And when I hear school principals stand up and say, I have way fewer behavioral referrals on the days when kids go out to the school garden. All of those things are positives that the school board can hear, and they're so rare that it catches their attention. And if you do that on a regular basis, by the time you then go to the budget committee and say, hey, these amazing things that we've been reporting to you, that the kids came in and talked to you, the kids came in and led a taste test on your school board, did a presentation, when a 10-year-old stands up and does a full presentation to a school board, those things make an impact on your school board. And those parents of your rock star kids who, you as garden educators know who your kids are that are the most impacted, most positively impacted by your school garden programming. Those are the kids who are going to be your best advocates. And those are the parents of those kids are your best advocates. And they're the ones that you need to get to your school board on a regular basis, whether it's quarterly, whether it's once a year, it doesn't matter. That should really be a main goal of yours. And I know it's one more thing, but of all the things you can do, if you want to be successful in getting support from your school board and your community, this is one of the most important things you can do. Work with your principal and your superintendent. Just put the word out there. Hey, I'd love to do a presentation to the school board, to the education committee, to the budget committee, and talk about what we're doing, just so they're aware, because the school board doesn't know. Most of us are volunteer. Everybody's a volunteer, and we need to be made aware. It's just like members of Congress. There's too much for them to know. They don't know everything. So that's why people need to go in and teach them. And that's one of the best things that you can do is educate your school board about what is happening in the schools that they are overseeing, because they don't know unless you tell them. And if you're not telling them, then someone who's upset about something is telling them, and that's the only thing they're getting. So that's one of the best things that you can do. I could talk about this for hours and hours. I know I'm over my time, and I want to make sure we have time for questions and answers. I will just remind folks that we are recording this. We'll share the recording, and Darcy has agreed to send me the presentation. And just like with our previous Maine School Garden Day sessions, we'll share out her presentation, and both Glenn and Darcy have agreed to share their email. So if folks have other questions, and I'll share my email as well. But I don't know, Sam has been monitoring the chat, and also if people want to just come off mute, feel free to jump in with any questions you might have for any of us.
When did he set this?
I just turned you on the microphone, John. John just said that RSU3 got very lucky when they were lucky enough to get Darcy, because he said he wasn't sure anybody could do that job. Just thought I'd share that with you, Darcy.
That's very kind. Thank you so much. I feel very lucky to have this job. And actually, just on a little side note, last year, starting at the end of October with Corona, I was asked to take on remote learning. And quite frankly, I was a little nervous that that might mean that maybe my role as a garden educator was going to be shifting, which it did for part of last year, most of last year. But I think it goes to show, because I'm doing my regular garden position now and garden education now, that at no point during when we were doing remote learning last year did administration indicate that this meant the garden position was ending, because I do think there is such strong support from administration for our programming here. I did see a couple questions in the chat regarding the number of students in our student body or in some of the different schools. And I don't have the exact figures right in front of me, but 3 of the 5 schools have, say, between 50 and 55 students. Morse has a little bit more than that. And I believe Mount View Elementary has over a couple of hundred students. So this year, I think I'll be working with around, say, 450 kids, and the students in the outlying schools, I see them once a week, all the classes once a week, every week, just like they would have art and music and phys ed. So that's been great. And somebody also had a question about the Sam Birch Bean Collection Project, and I'd be happy to pass along information on that if you email me directly, and I can let you know of the contact person, so you can get in touch with her if you're interested in growing beans. And just one other quick thing is, while my position is definitely teaching position is funded by the board, and I do get some money for materials and things like that, There are myriad grants out there for, supplementing some of the projects that we have. So don't be afraid to look at and look for garden grants, because they are out there. You just got to find them and put in the time, and but often a great source for some supplemental money for projects.
Yes. Also, there was a quick question about the recipe for the roasted root veggies.
Oh, so I think our cook just basically, it was eggplant, peppers, and tomatoes, diced everything up, little olive oil, and I think just simple seasoning, salt and pepper, and cubed them all up, roasted them in the oven, and then they were going to be mixed in with the Italian meal coming up this week. So pretty simple and delicious. And yes, it was Rachel who did that. Some people were asking if Rachel was our cook at Troy School still, and she is, and she has been wonderful, along with the other cooks as well.
Lovely. I'm just looking at the chat.
Awesome.
I did lose some of my chat when I transitioned from phone to computer, but I think there was just lots of lovely little side conversations and comments. One other question, I think, Ryan, did you answer this about Glenn asking if plan number 3 had been successful in communities, which was, I think, garnering support and creating full-time positions? Is that right?
No, it was the
Yeah, so
third one I talked about where teachers take on the responsibility.
Yeah. So the quick answer is no. I've never seen that work. FoodCorps has seen it work, not in Maine. There are examples of it working in other places. In particular, in Arkansas, there were a couple districts who the superintendent was really supportive of, basically making sure that this is, you kind of have to look at it like, when you want that to happen, you almost have to shift your entire focus to be on the garden. Like, every teacher, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to learn. And that's what they did. And it has been wonderful. I've never seen it work here. And in fact, when I came on board, I sat down with all the superintendents that I could get my hands on that we were partnered with, and had this very candid discussion about, here are the 3 options. Which one do you choose? And one superintendent in Maine said, I don't see us ever finding the money to create a position and fill it. So we are going to go with this 3rd option of get the workload into the existing staff. And I bit my tongue and I said, all right, if that's what you want to do, that's how we'll organize service, and that's what we'll go for. I'm really pleased to say that just through inertia and in honesty, the funding that came from COVID, that has completely shifted, and that district has now created several positions and is in the process of creating more through COVID funding. But then that will be, some of it has transitioned into the yearly school budget. So I still haven't seen that work in Maine. And it usually is the create a position and fill the position, because you need someone to be the hub of the wheel. We are over time, which is one of my biggest pet peeves in terms of running meetings. So I'm going to let everyone go, but we do have, like I said, we have the recording. We'll be sharing it out through email, and then Susan will be putting the recording on our website, msgn.org, and on our YouTube channel. And then I did share in the chat the email addresses for everyone that presented today, but we'll also include those in the email that goes out to all the folks who participated today. So really appreciate you all taking the time on a Saturday. Really appreciate everything that all of you are doing as educators to connect kids to these opportunities and to build these programs sustainably in your districts. Feel free to reach out to any of us if you have questions once you get the contact information. Hope everybody has a great weekend. Thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.